Welcome to the first lesson for our Global Moral Issues online class as we journey into the thick fog of applied ethics, especially as it pertains to the thorny, sticky, contentious global ethical issues that we will be confronting this semester. However, before we actually get into the thick of it and look at real concrete issues pertaining to nationality, patriotism, immigration, war, starvation, and famine, we should keep in mind that this is a philosophy class, and philosophers deal with arguments. So we're going to be studying the structure of arguments this week. Before we go into the structure of arguments, however, we should learn what an argument is not.
Finish my answer. My nightmare is my daughter's having anything to do with a person driving drunk. That's my nightmare. Okay. It could be a Jewish drunk. It could be a Polish drunk. It could be an Irish drunk. It could be an Italian drunk.
American
what the
crime,
hell difference does it make?
It makes plenty of difference.
It does not.
He doesn't have a right to be here.
He didn't commit a felony.
He doesn't have a right to be in this country.
What? But that has nothing to do with the fact that he was a drunk.
He should have been deported. He should have been deported, and this mayor and the police chief didn't deport him.
Listen, do you know how many people we have in jail?
Contra what our friends Bill O'Reilly and Geraldo Rivera may have demonstrated in that last clip, the purpose of an argument is not the following. It is not to win. It is not to force your opponent into submission. It is not to manipulate your opponent's emotions. It is not to annoy your opponent, although that can be fun. It is not even to get even though it does feel good. No, that is not the aim of disputes between reasonable people. Instead, the aim of disputes between, now this is important, reasonable people is to arrive at the truth. A nice formal way of defining it, which I'll just read this out loud because I like the way it's phrased, is we'll say this is the precise definition of a philosophical argument. We'll say that an argument is a series of sentences or propositions, one of which is offered as the claim to be supported and is called the conclusion, the rest of which are offered in support of the conclusion, and they're called premises. Important. We're not just interested in the truth of the premises, although this is, of course, a very important feature of a good argument, but we're interested in the connection between the premises and the conclusion. Let me give an example. Here's an argument. I'm going to just go ahead and tell you it's a bad example of an argument. If you saw an example of an argument like this in some of the readings, you should attack that. So we'll say P is the premise. 2 plus 2 equals 4. C is the conclusion. So all dogs are mammals. So from the premise 2 plus 2 equals 4, the argument wants you to infer that all dogs are mammals. Now, the premise is true. 2 plus 2 equals 4. If you don't believe me, I can't help you, but you might want to take a math class. Premise C is true as well. All dogs, in fact, are mammals. Again, take a biology class. And anyways, I picked those examples because they're trivial. And who in their right mind would dispute that 2 plus 2 equals 4? And if you do, I don't know, I'm worried. So there's something wrong with this argument, though, because you couldn't infer that all dogs are mammals from the truth that 2 plus 2 equals 4. So what could it possibly be? Well, the start, figuring out, like diagnosing the problem with this argument, is, or a more precise way of stating the problem, is that the conclusion doesn't follow from the premise, or the conclusion isn't entailed by the premise. So when a conclusion does not follow a premise or is not entailed by premise, as that first bullet point says, philosophers say that the argument is not logically valid. Now that's a technical phrase that might show up on a quiz. Logically valid. We're going to define that later. But I use that term logic. So you didn't think you'd be learning logic in a class on global moral issues? I'm sorry, but we are today. Logic, though, let me just briefly, it's a discipline that studies the procedure by which we evaluate arguments. It studies good ways to link premises to conclusions versus bad ways to link premises to conclusions. Not just interested in the truth of the premises, but in, like I said again, the connection between the premises and the conclusion. However, truth is the goal of good arguments, including good arguments related to global moral issues. So good arguments are restricted to those which have the potential to preserve the truth from premises to conclusions. So an argument can't be good if you don't have the right connection between the premises and the conclusion. That's not enough, but it's necessary for it. Okay, let's take a look at a certain type of argument that philosophers call deductive arguments, which you probably heard the word deduce before if you ever watched that show Sherlock on BBC, or the really bad Sherlock Holmes movies starring Robert Downey Jr., or actually read Conan Doyle's novels, which I doubt most of you have. They talk about how Holmes deduces stuff. This is kind of like that, but it's a little. We mean something a bit more precise than what Holmes would say when he's saying he was deducing, proof that Watson was not the killer. So deductive reasoning does not merely, I'll say, render the conclusion probable or likely, unlike Holmesian reasoning. Instead, deductive reasoning is such that the premises are intended to provide conclusive reasons for why a particular claim is true. I'll elaborate what that means in a second. But we're going to look at today 3 good-making features of a deductive argument. And this will be relevant to when you're reading arguments by philosophers and global moral issues. So there are validity, soundness, and convincingness, and we're going to look at all 3 in turn, starting with validity. So a valid deductive argument is one such that the premises and conclusions are related in a way that guarantees the truth of the conclusion, given the truth of the premises. Now, validity doesn't necessarily mean truth, and I'm going to repeat this several times until it sinks into your brains. That's how I learn logic myself. A valid deductive argument may have false premises. This is because validity concerns the form of the argument and guarantees only what would be the case if the premises were true. So a valid argument with true premises is what philosophers call a sound argument, but we're going to look at a sound argument later. Let's just stick with validity for right now. So anyways, again, a valid argument is such that if the premises would be true, then the conclusion must be true. 100% probability. So let's take a look at 2 arguments. Let's look at the first argument, argument 1. If Davis is a unicorn, then Davis is a kitten. Davis is a unicorn, so Davis is a kitten. Now let's take a look at argument 2. If Davis is a human, then Davis is a mammal. Davis is a human, so Davis is a mammal. With respect to the first argument, we wouldn't say that's a very promising argument. So I'm Davis, I'm your instructor, and I'm not a unicorn, and I'm also not a kitten. But 1 is actually still a valid argument. Argument 1, look at it again. If Davis is a unicorn, then Davis is a kitten. Premise 2, Davis is a unicorn. Conclusion, so Davis is a kitten. That's a valid argument. Why? Well, first off, validity is a logical feature of arguments, irrespective of the psychological fact that none of us would ever be convinced of the conclusion that Davis is a unicorn or a kitten. So again, validity is a feature of arguments, not a feature of our own psychology. 2, recall, is also a good argument. If Davis is a human, then Davis is a mammal. Davis is a human, so Davis is a mammal. But 2 is also kind of convincing. It's valid. So just like 1, we're going to say, and I'll explain why, the conclusion is appropriately related to the premises. And this will be captured in what we call the structure or form of the argument, which I'm going to look at in a second. But 2, unlike the first argument, 2 is a sound argument. And pay attention to this. A sound argument is one that is valid and has true premises. Notice, though, that 2 has the same structure or form as 1. So there's 2 and 1. It's a if A then B, A so B, or if P then Q, P so Q. Both of them have this kind of same structure. Look at it carefully. In fact, look at it. Just stare at both. Look at the first line in 1 and look at the first line in 2. Then look at the second line in 1 and look at the second line in 2. And then look at the third line in 1 and then look at the third line in 2. It's like algebra in a sense. So that's the structure. Look at the bottom where it says if P then Q, P so Q. We could put like a variable between the if and then after the then, and then the second and third lines. It'd be just like algebra. Okay, so they have the same form. Well, validity is a property or a feature of the form of an argument. Okay, so again, I'm going to repeat this. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true in a valid argument. Or another way to put this is, it is impossible in a valid argument for the premises to be true and the conclusion be false. A valid argument is one such that when the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. And it's the form. So if you have the content in the right parts of the form, then the conclusion of that form must be true. And then again, remember, it's a feature of the form or structure of the argument, not the content. Okay, so look at this form right there. It's a medical form. Someone has, I don't know, something you'd fill out at a doctor's office. So each patient gets the same form, but then they put different content into the form. So you might have contacts, you might not. You might have diabetes, you might not. You might take Ritalin for your ADD, you might not. You might be allergic to penicillin, you might not. You might smoke, and so on. So this is the same, every patient gets the same form, but each form gets different content. Okay. Well, now we're going to talk about these forms. We could talk about properties or features of the form that every patient fills out at the doctor's office. So every patient fills out a form that asks about patient health information and family health information and asks about other information. Then we could also talk about the content of each of these forms. So different patients are going to have different content in the form. Some patients, for example, will have high cholesterol and others will not. By the way, anyone wondering what the word floaters means? Right there. I don't want to know, but I have an idea. I apologize. I found this on Google Images. Although I think this is for an eye doctor, so I'm hoping it's not what I thought it was. Anyways, moving on. That's disgusting. Anyways, so I'm hoping just to illustrate the difference between form and content. Different arguments can have the same form but different content. And validity concerns the form of the argument. Okay, I'm sorry for being repetitive, but I'm actually not sorry for being repetitive because this type of information, you just got to be hit with it from all angles. You got to be broadsided by it. You got to be uppercut by it. You got to be hit over the head with it. You got to be blindsided by it until it's how you learn it. And if you've taken logic before, then maybe you can help your fellow students on the discussion boards. Okay. We've been talking about validity. Let's talk about invalidity as well. All right. So an invalid argument has a structure or form such that it would be possible for the premises to be true, but the conclusion be false. So in an invalid argument, you could have all true premises, and yet the conclusion is false. And that would be bad. That'd be naughty. You don't want an argument like that. So let's take a look at an invalid argument. And this is an invalid argument with true premises. Oh, this is a really mean one. This is an invalid argument, but it has not only true premises, it also has a true conclusion. So I'm being naughty right now. So look at argument 4. If Davis is a snake, then Davis is a reptile. Davis is not a snake, so Davis is not a reptile. Okay, again, premise in the argument, the first line, if Davis is a snake, then Davis is a reptile. That's true. Anytime you have a snake, you're going to have a reptile. Okay, it's just because snakes are reptiles. Premise 2, the second line, Davis is not a snake. That is also true. I don't think Purdue hires snakes to teach global moral issues. I'm just not sure. They generally pick human beings. You can, if you're not sure that I'm a human being, just go by my office or my office hours sometime. I swear, I'm not a snake. Premise 3, Davis is not a reptile. That's also true. That's the conclusion. I'm not a reptile. All right, but I said this argument is invalid. So looking at the definition of invalidity on the top bullet point, and then take a look at this argument for a minute. And why would this argument be invalid? Think about it. Just think for a minute. I'm going to maybe pause it. Actually, just pause it. You don't need me to, hum for 30 seconds. This is a video. Okay. We'll say argument 4 is invalid because it has a form in which we could construct a counterexample that has true premises and a false conclusion. So here's the form of 4. If P, then Q. Not P, so not Q. Okay, take a look at the form in the second bullet point. If P, then Q. Not P, so not Q. Let's go back a few slides. Here's the form of argument 2 and 1. If P, then Q. P, so Q. Okay, look at that carefully. Okay, now look at the form of 4. If P, then Q. Not P, so not Q. So there's a difference. Whereas in argument 2 and 1, the second line would say P. In argument 4, the second line says not P. And whereas in 2 and 1, the third line, the conclusion would say Q. And the third line in the fourth argument is not Q. So there's an important difference. One's affirming something, we'd say, and the other one is denying something. All right, so why is 4 invalid, though, but 1 and 2 valid? Well, first thing we'll do is we'll construct a counterexample. You've probably already read this, but I'll read it out loud anyways. Here's a counterexample with the exact same form. We'll say it's argument 5. If Davis is a unicorn, then Davis is a mammal. Davis is not a unicorn, so Davis is not a mammal. All right? Same form. If P, then Q, not P, so not Q. Premise 1. Well, yeah, that's kind of odd. Well, no, that's not really. Unicorns, we'd say, are mammals. There aren't, in fact, unicorns. But it's not like it's physically impossible for there to be a member of the equine species, or equine, I'm sorry, that has a horn. I mean, I don't know. It could be geneticists will make unicorns in 30 years. I don't think they'll have the magical powers of healing or the feature of unicorns that only virgins can tame and ride them. But, you know, a horse with a horn, why can't that happen? So, and I mean, just like horses are mammals, why wouldn't a unicorn be a mammal? So we won't say that's a false premise. We'll say it's true. Premise 2, Davis is not a unicorn. Again, I'm not a snake. I'm not a reptile. I'm also not a unicorn. If you don't believe me, come by my office hours. They don't generally, well, one, there aren't really any unicorns around. And two, if they were, I'm not sure they'd be qualified to teach global moral issues at Purdue University. Maybe at Indiana University, but not at Purdue. We have higher standards. Okay, so first two premises, and we'll say they're true. I occasionally get this student, when I teach this in the actual classroom, not online, that thinks he's or she's really clever, and they'll try to come up with a cute counterexample to one of these premises. Don't try that. Don't waste my time, and don't waste your time. You're not clever. I've been doing this for a long time. All right. Premise 3, Davis is not a mammal. That is false. I am a mammal. I'm a mammal because I'm a human being, and all human beings are mammals. I have lungs. I'm warm-blooded. I breathe air. Go on, so on, etc. I'm a human. I'm a mammal. So this is an argument with true premises and a false conclusion. And that's the definition of an invalid argument. It's an argument with a structure form that could have true premises and a false conclusion. Okay, whoops. So both premises are true, but the conclusion is false, so the argument's invalid. It does not preserve truth from the premises to the conclusion. All right. We won't spend too much time on this because I'm trying to condense an entire logic class into one 50-minute presentation. But it's worth looking at some argument forms that we're going to be encountering a lot this semester in a lot of our readings. And you'll be giving probably in your discussion board posts as well. And that you do all the time anyway. So this is a brief aside. Most of you already know this stuff. Most of you already know logic. You just don't know how to articulate it. So you do this all the time. You're driving to Purdue, suppose, instead of taking the bus. And you say, if the parking lot is full, then I'll park on the street. If P, then Q. The parking lot is full, so I'm going to park on the street. You think like that. Well, we have attached a name to it. We call it modus ponens. This is something you do all the time. So here's an example. We've been using this argument form a lot in these past few slides, but here's another example, and I don't really hate small animals. This is just an example. If Davis hates small animals, then Davis hates kittens. If Davis hates small animals, so Davis hates kittens. That's an example of a modus ponens argument. If P, then Q, P, so Q. By the way, you may ask, why do I pick on small, helpless, cute animals so much? I will explain that later this semester. I have reasons. They're ethical reasons. In the meantime, try to guess. Maybe make a discussion board a post about this. Why does Davis pick on small animals? I don't care. All right. Here's another argument form that we haven't seen this. We have something subtly similar to it, but we call this modus tollens, and this is something you do all the time as well. If P, then Q, not Q, so not P. Okay? If the parking lot is full, then I'll park on the street. Oh, no, let me think of a better example. Let's just use the example I have. So if P, then Q, not Q, so not P. Example, if Davis has magical powers, then Davis can tame unicorns. It is not the case that Davis can tame unicorns, so it is not the case that Davis has magical powers. Here's a better example that I didn't put on the slide, but if Davis is a human, we'll say this. If Davis is a unicorn, then Davis is a fictional animal. Davis, so, is not a fictional animal. So Davis is not a unicorn. Here's one other example. If Joe's pet is a dog, then Joe's pet is a canine. However, Joe's pet is not a canine, so Joe's pet is not a dog. Here's another one. If Davis has $10, then Davis has at least $5. Davis does not have at least $5. He's broke. So Davis definitely doesn't have $10. Anyways, I've hit these. You think like this all the time. That's why I'm giving all these examples. So here's a question. Is that argument sound above? Okay, let's just ignore that. It's not. It's false. All right. Oh, look, here I am with a very bad picture riding a unicorn. Oh, how did that happen? Oh, no. Anyways, there's proof I'm not a unicorn because I'm riding a unicorn. There. All right. Disjunctive syllogism is another valid argument form. So here's the form. Either P or Q, not P, so Q. This is, again, something you think all the time. Either I'm gonna either have pizza for lunch or a hamburger for lunch. Well, I'm not having pizza for lunch, so I'll have a hamburger. Either it's raining or it's not. It's not raining. Well, that's a bad example. Either it's raining outside or it's sunny outside. It's not raining outside, so it's sunny outside. There's a good example. Either I pass this class or I fail this class. I'm not going to fail this class, so I'm going to pass this class. And I hope all of you pass this class. Work hard. All right, I won't read my example about kittens and zombies. But there's a kitten zombie. Isn't that cute? Don't pet a kitten zombie. Hypothetical syllogism. Here's the form. If P then Q, if Q then R, so if P then R. Here's my silly example. If Davis hates small organisms, then Davis hates small animals. If Davis hates small animals, then Davis hates kittens. So if Davis hates small organisms, then Davis hates kittens. Okay. If it's raining outside, I'm going to bring my umbrella. If I bring my umbrella, then I better not open it indoors. So if it's, that's a bad example. I shouldn't think out loud. I should have prepped this beforehand. I apologize for wasting your time and money. Just kidding. What would be an example? How about you think of an example? Well, I'm doing all this work anyways. It's your turn, okay? So press the pause button, think of an example, and make a discussion board post with an example of a hypothetical syllogism, okay? Just do that. Why should I do all the thinking? All right. Reductio ad absurdum. This is a little bit trickier. It's where you assume something, and then you show that what you assume entails a contradiction. So you assume P, and then by assuming P, eventually you show that P leads to affirming Q and denying Q. All right, so Q and not Q is a contradiction. If you're committed to the truth that Q is the case, but Q is also not the case, then you have a contradiction. And philosophers hate contradictions. We 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 hate contradictions. Sorry, I just got caught in a loop. Yeah, contradictions are like the worst sin you could commit in a philosophy paper. If you find a philosopher arguing contradictory things, jump on it. Okay, attack it. It's so naughty. All right. Another one's called dilemma. And it goes like this: either P or Q. If P, then not R. If Q, then not R, so not R. So you assume that two things both lead to the same thing. So either only philosophers can see unicorns or anyone can see them. If only philosophers can see unicorns, then someone can see them. If anyone can see unicorns, then someone can see them. So someone can see unicorns. Let me think of a better example. Either it's raining outside or it's sunny outside. If it's raining outside, I'm still going to wear clothes today, and I'm not going to walk around outside naked. But if it's sunny outside, I'm not going to walk around naked. So either way, I'm not going to walk around naked. I'm going to be clothed. Here's an example of a dilemma. Okay, let's talk about soundness now. Remember there were 3 good-making features of arguments? We just talked about validity. Now we're going to talk about soundness and convincingness. Now the good news is we don't have to say nearly as much about 2 and 3, soundness and convincingness. So take a look back at the previous dilemma. All right, see it? That dilemma is valid, but something seems wrong with it, for unicorns don't exist. Take a look also at 2. That's a long way back, but we're going to go back there anyways. Almost there. There it is. If Davis is a human, then Davis is a mammal. Davis is a human, so Davis is a mammal. All right, now we have a long way to go back. Technology has not advanced that much, at least PowerPoint technology. All right, take a look at 2. That is also valid, but it doesn't seem to have anything wrong with it. So the question is, what is the difference between 2, the one about mammals, and then the one about unicorns? Well, the difference concerns not the form of the argument. That's what validity is concerned with, but instead it concerns the content. So the premises of the unicorn argument are false, while the premises in 2 are true. So while we want arguments to be valid, we also want them to have true premises. So we'll call this feature, the feature in which a valid argument has true premises, soundness. Repeat, a sound argument is one that has true premises and is valid. Repeat, a sound argument has true premises and is valid. Repeat, a sound argument is valid and has true premises. Okay, that's the important thing. Suppose there was a quiz and I said, what's a sound argument? You would say it's a valid argument that has true premises, or an argument with true premises that is valid. Okay, yeah, that's all I really need to say about that. If you mastered the definition of validity, and then you only have to add one thing for the property of soundness, validity plus true premises. That's it. I'm not going to say anything more about that. All right, one last good-making feature of an argument is what we'll call convincingness. So we'll say there is an additional quality of good arguments. We'll call that arguments are meant to make progress in a disagreement. So it's not yelling at each other and being right. It's finding the truth, getting to the truth of a matter. Okay, because that's what we should be interested in. Is what is the true answer? What is the right answer? What is the correct answer? Especially in global moral issues. Suppose there's a situation in a third world country where they have a choice between doing agriculture, which will bring food and probably money from exports, which will help the nation develop. But on the other hand, if they do agricultural, they'll deplete the forestry there, which will cause a drought. It seems to be a sticky, thorny moral dilemma. It's like drought on the one hand, or lack of economic development on the other hand. Well, you want to get to the truth of it. You don't want to just win or yell the loudest. You want to get the right answer. You want to find the right course of action. Okay, so philosophers, especially working in global moral issues, that's what we want. We're interested in the truth. So that's why we're interested in this third feature of arguments as well. In addition to validity and soundness, we're going to say that arguments, I'll just read it. Recall that arguments are meant to make progress in a disagreement. And arguments do this they do this well when they show you something you hadn't previously seen. So some sound arguments, that is, some valid arguments with true premises, don't show you something that you've previously seen. You don't learn something new. For example, here's an argument. This is a valid and this is a sound argument. Premise 1, dogs are mammals. And Davis likes Black Flag. For you kids and your Justin Biebers, Black Flag was a 1980s punk band. Okay, so that's the first premise. Davis likes a Black Flag and dogs are mammals. That's true. That is a true premise. Premise 2, with the conclusion. So, dogs are mammals. Okay, that's a valid argument. You can infer that dogs are mammals from the premise that dogs are mammals and Davis likes Black Flag. You can infer that. That is a sound argument, which means it has true premises and it's valid. It's got the right connection between the premises and the conclusion. So both the premise and conclusion are true and the argument is valid. But for example, supposing in a biological debate where you're trying to convince, say, your roommate who's stubborn, who for some reason refuses to admit that dogs are mammals. Suppose you're trying to convince your roommate that dogs are mammals. Would this argument convince your roommate that dogs are mammals? I would say no, it's not convincing. For I have not started with premises that you already agreed to and then shown you by argument that dogs are mammals. So this is a third feature then called convincingness, where you kind of learn something new through an argument. So like I said, the best deductive arguments then are sound and convincing. And of course, if they're sound, they're also valid, because validity is a part of the definition of soundness. All right, let's look at a few logical fallacies then. I guarantee you, if you ever read the Purdue Exponent Opinions page, you will find fallacies like this. And you'll probably find this in regular newspapers as well, and on online forums, and on the news channels, and politicians do it all the time. You want to learn how to avoid these, and you also want to learn how to spot these. So let's just talk about logical fallacies real quick, or argumentative fallacies. So just as there are good ways of reasoning, there are also bad ways of reasoning. Bad arguments would say are fallacies, or we'd say they're fallacious. So most fallacies will affect one of the three features of good arguments that we looked at: validity, soundness, and what was the third one? Convincingness. yeah, so any argument that's fallacious will run afoul of one of those three features. So here's a fallacy that's common. It's called affirming the consequent. Here's the form. If P, then Q. Premise 2, Q. Conclusion, so P. That's the form. If P, then Q. Q, so P. Here's an example. If Davis's aunt is a hoarder, then Davis's aunt's house smells. Okay? Premise 2, Davis's aunt's house smells. Conclusion, so Davis's aunt is a hoarder. There's the argument. And I say that argument is fallacious. Now the question is, why is this argument fallacious? Why? Real quick, by the way, look at the top of this where it says if P then Q. In an argument, anything between the word if and then, we'll say, is, okay, we'll actually take a look. See the statement if P then Q? That's called a conditional. It's a conditional statement. It always has the structure if blank then blank. Okay? What goes between the word if and the word then in a conditional is what's called the antecedent. Ante is Latin for before. And then anything that comes after the word then is what philosophers call the consequent. Okay? So in this argument, you affirm the consequent and then you try to affirm the antecedent from that. So the question is, why is this argument fallacious? Well, you probably already read this, but I'll just say it's invalid because it is possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. It could be true that my aunt's house smells, but my aunt not be a hoarder. She could have been on vacation and a rodent died in her AC unit, or she could have hardly bathed. Whatever. There's many reasons why her house could smell. So that is why that is fallacious. We found a counterexample. Okay. All right. Here's another fallacy. It's very similar. It's called denying the antecedent. And it takes the form of if P then Q, not P, so not Q. All right, why is this argument fallacious? Well, here's why. Well, here's an example. If Betty White has kissed Davis, then at least one celebrity woman has kissed Davis. Betty White has not kissed Davis. So it is not the case that at least one celebrity woman has kissed Davis, okay? So there's some content to that form now. So the question is, why is this a fallacy? Well, again, it violates the feature of arguments that we're looking for, of validity. It's invalid. So if it's invalid, it's fallacious. And it's invalid because it's possible for the premises to be true, but the conclusion be false. So even if Betty White hasn't kissed Davis, another celebrity woman could have kissed me, like Barbara Bush. Okay, here's another fallacy that appears. It's called equivocation. It's a fancy name, but you should understand what we mean. So this fallacy occurs when an expression appearing in more than one premise shifts its meaning mid-argument. So the best way to explain this is with an example. So here's an example. All Reds are communists. All right, that was a derogatory term towards, I guess, left-wing individuals, especially in the 1950s. So if you're a communist, you were called a Red. In fact, the Soviet Union's flag at the time was red, so that was part of it. Okay. So, premise 1, all Reds are communists. Premise 2, Mars is a red planet. 3, so Mars is a communist planet. Okay, that's silly. Of course, red in the second premise doesn't mean the same thing as red in the first premise. In the first premise, red is a political stance. In the second premise, it refers to an actual color. So that's equivocating. It's two different meanings of the word red. All right? So the above argument supposedly takes this form. All F's are G's. S is an F, so S is a G. But it supposedly takes that form, but really it takes a different form. All F's are G's, S is an H, so S is a G. So just because it has the same letters, it doesn't mean it has the same meaning. And it's the meaning that counts. All right, another fallacy is called a false dilemma. This affects not the validity of an argument, but the soundness. So here's an example of a false dilemma. Either Bieber is the greatest musician to have ever lived, or Bieber is the worst musician to have ever lived. Now, we'd say that this is not sound, okay? Or it's not true. Because it may be the case that Bieber is the second worst musician to have ever lived. Okay? Yeah, so there's more than two options, basically. It says, it presents it, a false dilemma assumes that there's only two options when there's actually more than two options. Like you could say, either it's raining outside, or it's sunny outside. Well, it could be neither raining nor sunny outside. It could be nighttime. Davis is short or Davis is tall. Well, Davis could be medium height. Either we need to give money to this country, or we need to give no aid to this country. Well, there's other ways to give aid to a country other than financial aid. So who's the worst musician, by the way? Well, I don't know. We all have our opinions. You can have your own. Okay, this is another fallacy. It's called begging the question. This affects the third feature of good arguments, convincingness. Here, the arguer presupposes the truth of what is to be proven. Here's an example. In David Hasselhoff's biography, Hasselhoff claims to be an honest man. This claim is true since Hasselhoff wouldn't lie. So Hasselhoff is an honest man. So we're begging the question in this argument. We're assuming the truth of what we should prove. We should prove that he's an honest man. However, you don't prove that Hasselhoff is an honest man by just arguing that Hasselhoff is an honest man and saying he's an honest man because he wouldn't lie. And he wouldn't lie because he's an honest man. That means the same thing. You're not adding anything, okay? I think I had another example of begging the question earlier. Maybe I didn't, though. Oh, yeah. Actually, yeah. See this argument? Right there. Where's my mouse? There it is. Circle it. Okay. Dogs are mammals and Davis likes black flag. So dogs are mammals. So if you're trying to prove that dogs are mammals, you couldn't start with the premise that dogs are mammals and then prove that dogs are mammals. That's begging the question. It's valid and it's sound, but it's not convincing. Okay. Do I have anything else to say? No. So take that in and study hard.